Hey traders, Cousin Vinny coming to you from theclosingprint.com on August the 16th, 2015. In this video we'll cover the indices as usual. All of them are marginally higher on a weekly basis, less than 1%. Tick and Tick Q marginally higher as well, though they have been descending for the better of 2 months. NYSE and NASI for the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ 100. NYSE is sideways, NASI continues to move lower. Note breadth, we're seeing no MADs or MDDs, major distribution or major accumulation days. Monday we saw one pop last week at 80%, 8-1 in favor of the bulls. In CPC we registered a plus 1.45, I believe. On Friday, Vinky pointed that out early in the morning. So we weren't surprised to see prices moving higher, being we opened above the pivot and stayed there for the remainder of the day. Currencies, US dollar broke down out of an ascending wedge and presently is bear flagging on the lower Bollinger Bands. Bonds looked pretty good last week on the back of crude oil and copper lower. Gold bounced, but it is overbought now. And we're seeing utilities sectors as well as real estate continuing to look bullish. We'll look at some setups in the IBD50 and some scan observations and possibly some setups through the eye of the 10 Easto MACD setup. Okay, let's take a look at the S&P Composite 1500. This is the S&P 500 plus the S&P Midcap 400 and the S&P 600 small caps. We are moving sideways underneath all of the moving averages. The magenta line is the 10 EMA. We close slightly above that but below everything else. Price action continues to move sideways for the most part. Slow Stow is moving sideways and MACD resides below the zero line. Looking at a chart of the spiders, however, we are slightly above the 50-period moving average, the green line, as well as the 10 EMA. We are dealing with this volume by price level, resistance overhead. Slow Stow is trying to make new highs and is approaching the red zone, and MACD is below its signal line and just dipped down below the zero line recently. Volume wasn't what I thought it would be when I looked at it later in the evening on Friday compared to what happened on Wednesday. So keep that in mind this week. This is a chart of the New York Stock Exchange Composite Index. Now, what I want you to note is we continue to see the 50-period moving average moving lower and below the 200-period. We are currently 24 points, just shy of 24 points below the 200-period moving average. Now, 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, we were at plus 33.55. We've changed markedly since that level was. Keep an eye on MACD. Continues to reside down below the zero line and below its signal line. And of course, up-down volume really isn't giving us much since that Monday spike that we saw at 8-1 in favor of the bulls. But that was quickly reversed, if you remember, and we moved lower precipitously after the lows of that level were breached. Now, when we look at the NASDAQ 100, we can tell that we're right inside of this volume by price band. Price is just below the 10-period EMA and sitting on top of the 50-period. Note the Bollinger Bands, the top is turning down and the bottom is moving lower as well. We'll have to keep an eye on that this week. The 200-period moving average continues to move higher, so for the most part this still looks somewhat bullish. Although we are moving sideways, volume was lower than the average. MACD continues its descent and Slow Stow continues to move higher. This is a chart of the Dow Jones Composite It's comprised of 65 stocks in the utilities, industrials, and the transports sectors. Note that we're traveling back up towards this descending trend line, and we have resistance at the moving averages overhead, as well as this volume by price resistance level. So keep an eye on that. We could be seeing a shoulder, head, and possibly a shoulder setup if this continues to move higher. I don't expect that, but anything's possible. We have 2 weeks left in the month of August, and MACD is still down below the zero line. So this needs to pick up if we're going to see any indication of a move higher in the very near future. Looking at the industrials, the Dow 30, remember it's only 30 stocks, but it is what Main Street looks at. We're right at this lower level here. Descending pattern, we have the 10-period EMA overhead. The 20 is moving lower, as well as the 50. MACD is firmly below the zero line, and slow still continues to move higher. We could watch this histogram. Perhaps we'll see higher prices this week. I wouldn't bank on it, but anything's possible. We have some levels of resistance overhead that I'll be watching as well. Now here is the Russell 2000 weekly. The reason why I'm showing the weekly is I saw this dragonfly doji, long-legged doji, at just above the 50 period and below the lower Bollinger Band. The 10 EMA is moving lower, and the 20 is turning lower as well. The 10 EMA crossed on Tuesday, so we'll keep an eye on that. For small caps, many of you did quite well on IWM, so we did note that. And MACD is down below the zero line. The longer duration 1226 is headed that way as well. Slow still is oversold, so we could see an oversold bounce on the weekly. Let's take a look at the daily chart, and we can see this descending wedge. That looks a little bullish, but it has to get above the 10 period, the 20 period, and the 50 to take out new highs. Note we could see a head and shoulders top here. Just something to keep in mind as slow still continues to move higher. But again, note that MACD is below the zero line on all of these indices. That's very important to keep an eye on. And lastly is the mid-cap 400. Wanted to see why the S&P 1500 composite was moving sideways to slightly higher. Small caps, as you saw previously, were moving lower. It did have a little bounce. We have this large volume by price level overhead to deal with, and previous support turned resistance now, and we have the 50 period moving average overhead. Note MACD is below the zero line on this index as well. Okay, let's take a look at our indicators real quick. Here's tick cumulative. We noted that it's still in a descending pattern. It did cross up. This is the S&P 500 down below. We had this bounce off the lower Bollinger Band. Note that both of them are turning in now, so we should see further consolidation. If we see a big pop and a follow through, then these will turn back around and move in the opposite directions. Tick Q for the NASDAQ 100 looks exactly the same with respect to a little crossover and a descending pattern that's still playing out. Lower Bollinger Bands here as well on the NASDAQ composite, and prices move slightly off of that level on Friday. NAMO closed slightly lower on Friday, so that's still somewhat negative for the NASDAQ. Note we're still inside of this range that we're keeping an eye on, and NASI continues to move lower. We had a slight little change in amplitude of that signal line, so we'll keep an eye on that as well. NYMO has a similar look, though we were positive slightly at 16.33. We note these little spikes and the moving average. The lower highs that we're seeing in the New York Stock Exchange composite, and the summation index continues to move sideways to slightly higher. Looking at a chart of the VIX, we note that the VIX continues to move lower. We were looking for a spike. We got one up to the 1635, 1640 level on Wednesday, but that dissipated very quickly. We continue to see these lower highs. We need to take out this trend line and these highs here to get more bullish on this chart of the S&P 500. Our chart of VIX VXV also gives us similar information. We're down in the red zone, areas where we have seen peaks in the past. Note that we're very far off of this triple top that we put in back in July, then moved lower. We're down below the moving averages, so we're keeping an eye on that with respect to VIX VXV, the 1 month to the 3 month volatility indexes. A chart of the New York Stock Exchange advanced decline continues to move sideways, pretty much in parallel with price. CPC, the put-call ratio, isn't giving much of a signal here as well, so we'll keep an eye on this one, but not expecting much. Note on Friday we saw a spike. We're not sure what that was about, but prices did follow, and we saw a nice little move higher on Friday. This is a nice little chart that we put together, which reflects the S&P 500 and the New York Stock Exchange advanced decline. When we've seen spikes into the red zone in the past, we've also seen peaks in the index as well. So keep an eye on this. If this moves higher tomorrow into the week, we could expect to see some weakness at this descending trend line. Looking at a chart of the US dollar, we've witnessed this move lower, a breakout of this upper trend line here. Prices started ascending, we created this little wedge and we broke down. Now we're sitting on top of the 50-period moving average, the green line, the lower Bollinger Band, and we have the 10-period EMA and the 20-period moving average overhead. Bollinger Bands are fairly narrow, and I would expect to see, with slow stow nearing oversold, that we might see a move to the upside. The reason why I'm thinking that is inside of all of this action, we're also looking at the possibility of a cup forming here on the daily. So keep that in mind if you're thinking bullish on the US dollar versus bearish, and how that will affect commodities. When we look at the chart of copper, this continues to reflect the slowdown that's anticipated in China. So we're at lows, despite the fact that home builders are doing fairly well. Copper isn't doing that great. Gold did have a bounce last week. We saw Wednesday hit the peak, Thursday turn around, and Friday we're just basically putting in a spinning top with a long shadow up above. 10 EMA is below, and the 20 period as well. They had a cross there. Bands are narrowing, so we could be seeing a change of trend or a rejection here. Note the previous lows here, that would be initial resistance. Note the volume, slow stow, and also that MACD is above the signal line and is now above the zero line as well. Crude oil is at the lows that we saw back in March. This continues to look very bearish with the oversupply that's hitting the market with the Saudis and the Middle East, as well as here in the US. We continue to see weakness that could be exacerbated with any catalyst that might hit the markets in the very near future. If the US dollar continues its sideways action, that could help, but if it moves higher, we could also see a move lower in the oil sector. Reflecting on bonds for a moment, TLT, the 20-year, broke out of this descending channel a couple of weeks ago, continues to find support at the 10 EMA. Now prices are consolidating above the 200 period moving average, and TLT moved higher Friday despite the fact that the spiders did as well. So we'll look for a resolution on those two this week. We mentioned junk bonds last week as well. Continues to move lower in this descending pattern. Put in something of a bear flag on Friday. Tepid volume. Slow stow is turning back up, but MACD is firmly down below the zero line. So that's more of a short against resistance than it is a counter trend long, in my humble opinion. We have all this volume by price, resistance overhead as well. AGG, the Barclays Aggregate Bond Fund, has a lot more to it than just bonds and treasuries. So we're keeping an eye on this because most of the bond funds have this as a benchmark, And we're noting that we're seeing support in the zone between the 10 and the 30 period moving averages. So until that changes, the trend is up on AGG. Gauging the catalysts that we might see this week, we'll take a look at the sectors. IYR and XLU are seeing quite a tear in prices to the upside. That's something to keep in mind. We also saw XBI down below the weekly moving averages. We have a 2050 cross, and something to keep an eye on there as well. XLF looks like it's trying to hold its own. So all in all, the sectors are something that we'll keep an eye on for catalysts this week for a move higher or a move lower. Here is IYR, a breakout of the ascending wedge. Moving averages all turned up, so this is looking very bullish. We're at the 200 period moving average now and about to service into this Kirby area above this volume by price resistance. Note the volume, MACD is above the zero line, and slow stow is in the red zone. So look at the real estate sector shares and see what you might find there. I'm sure there's a lot of setups in that group. A chart of XLU gives us a similar look. Got above this volume by price resistance level and the 200 period moving average. Prices just bolted higher last week above all of these previous highs. So the trend change is firmly in place in this typically defensive sector where investors go to get higher yields with treasury yields continuing to move lower. Note MACD is above the zero line and above its signal line. XLF is basically moving sideways. Note the 10 period EMA. Price just above that. And we have some narrow Bollinger Bands to deal with. MACD is drifting slightly lower. And here is XBI. Biotech's not looking so hot. Biotech's not looking so hot at the present time as we continue to drift lower along this lower Bollinger Band. 10 EMA is overhead now, as well as the 20 and the 50. And we have all of this volume by price congestion to deal with. The 200 period is just below. Looks like we're headed for that level in the near future. If that happens, we're going to see more selling, and that could weigh on the S&P 500 as well as the NASDAQ. Also note where MACD is, down below the zero line, and slow stow near the green zone. And lastly, look at ITB, the Dow Jones U.S. Home Construction Index. Breaking out here, closed at 2871. This previous high that we saw in late March, early April at 2879 is what we're watching. Looks like this is going to break higher. Prices above the 10 EMA, and we have some nice candles all during last week. MACD is above the zero line, looking pretty good on the home builders. Okay, the IBD50, we'll look for this to give us some indication of which direction we might be headed this week. We generally do that. This new list has a few new names. IMN Healthcare was one of them. Aetna is on the list now. ZBRA dropped off, as we mentioned it might. And we also have Alexion gracing the list. Can't remember if that was on last week, but we'll keep an eye on these names for any setups that we might want to trade this week. AHS continues to move higher. Nice volume. MACD firmly above the zero line and above its signal line. Slow still turning back up. Looking pretty good on this name. I would like to see a nice flag here and then a breakout above this level at 36.34 on increased volume. Aetna looking very bullish here, above the volume by price level, above all the moving averages. Just broke above the 50 period on Friday. Note the Bollinger Bands are expanding. We have this gap to fill. Not that it's necessary. I don't follow it so much on stocks versus the indices. However, Aetna does look good. We have this level up here at 134.11 to deal with. MACD is above the zero line. Looking very bullish here. Note that 1226 just emerged, so this isn't too far off of a breakout level. If this pulls back a little bit into this candle, this could be a good setup for the week. Probably one of the better looking ones so far. Alaska Air, we're still in this one from back in this level here when we broke out. Pulled back to the 10 EMA. That continues to be support. Prices continue to hug that and be sandwiched between the 10 EMA and the upper Bollinger Band. MACD is above the zero line and above its signal line, and slow still continues to drift higher. If prices on the US dollar continue to move lower, that could be a little bit of a headwind on airline stocks. Ambarella continues to be on the list. However, keep an eye on the fact that we are down below the 50-period moving average. The Bollinger Bands are starting to expand. This could quickly accelerate and get away from you if you're still in shares from back here when we traded the 77.80 breakout with the narrow Bollinger Bands back in late April, early March. Note where MACD is. The shorter duration is already starting to move below, is already below the zero line, and the 1226 is starting to head that way. Could cross this week. Watch the histogram and levels on AMBA. This could be a good short if you're not long in the name presently. Bank of the Ozarks continues to build a descending wedge pattern. This looks like it could break higher this week if XLF continues to show strength. Cadence Design continues to look nice. It formed this flag and is pushing higher. It's only about 50 cents above the breakout level. Just keep that in mind. The 10-period EMA is moving higher. There's no overhead supply to speak of, and MACD is above its zero line and its signal line. Cognizant CTSH, nice low flag at the 10-period above the volume by price resistance levels. That's support down here for any kind of pullback. Presently, it looks like this is going to continue to move higher once slow stow and MACD turn and move higher. So I'd be waiting for that latter development to occur. Constellation Brands, that's a name that I put into my new book that I'm looking at this week. Working on a few things like the cover and the back, as well as some of the other graphics. Been doing that most this week, so if you try to get in touch with me, that's why I didn't answer your tweets or your email messages. I've been pretty preoccupied with getting this book out. Stars continues to move higher. Broke out above this level here. Nice horizontal base. Nice Bollinger Band squeeze. Prices broke out and above the volume by price levels, and no overhead supply to speak of here as well. Slow stow and MACD are both booking higher. Ellie Mae putting in a little wedge pattern right here, a little pennant right above the 10-period EMA. That could resolve itself to the upside. 82.92 above that level would put it above 52-week highs and no overhead supply to speak of. MACD's turning down though, so keep an eye on that one for later in the week. Facebook finally starting to look a little more interesting. Price got it back above the 10-period EMA with a 20-period overhead. Tight Bollinger Bands now. It's post-earnings. Volume has tapered off while we move sideways to slightly down, so that's a good sign. Slow stow turning back up, and MACD is above the zero line and turning back up on the short duration. So this one looks pretty good for the week as well if we get follow through to the upside on Facebook. Foot Locker, we looked at this one last week. This looked really good. Continues to move higher. MACD above the zero line and slow stow somewhat overbought. Global Payments, GPN, similar space as HAWK, Black Hawk, continues to grind higher. Nice little flag. Resolve to the upside. We were thinking about taking this one this week. Passed, but we didn't get it. We noted the volume and MACD above its zero line and its signal line. So we're watching this one. Hopefully this flags again. Maybe we can get a little piece and put it in our kids' Coverdale College Fund. Manhattan Associates looking interesting right above the 10-period EMA. Bollinger Bands tight. This is going to move probably to the upside considering where MACD is. Slow stow would be nice if this recycled one more time and gave us an opportunity, but not a prerequisite. This could bolt this week. Just remember to check earnings. There are still a few names out there that haven't reported yet. Mentor Graphics, MENT, Software Industry Group. I don't remember this one being on the list last week. Nice little descending pattern. Price is testing the 50-period moving average, tight Bollinger Bands, slow stow and MACD. Not the best signal, but for an aggressive trade, if this turns back up and the signal line gets above, MACD gets back above the zero line, this one could go once it gets above this volume by price resistance level. Nike, another cyclical stock in the footwear, obviously, and sports clothing. Nice little pullback to the 20 period, moving back above the 10 period EMA in this otherwise ascending pattern. Slow still turning back up, MACD above the zero line. We'd like to see MACD turn back up as well as STO continue to move higher. Paycom, PAYC, continues to flag out here. This one looks like it's going to take off this week. Note the volume by price support level just below. We've got these breakout levels here at 39.75 to deal with. Overhead, we closed at 38.35. MACD looks really good above the zero line and above its signal line. Slow STO's recycling. Could turn back up. Watch the volume here. Did move lower on this flag sideways, so that's a good sign. Hopefully this breaks out this week. SSNC, another software name, looks like this is going to break out. Nice little pennant pattern above the 10 period EMA, above the volume by price support level, and no overhead supply at 52-week highs. MACD above the zero line, look for that to turn back up this week. Service Corp International, SCI, continues to grind higher, moving sideways. Could see this move higher this week. MACD above the zero line and needs to turn back up on the short duration as well as STO turn back up. Note the volume looks good at 52-week highs. This one could continue to grind higher. Fairly inexpensive name at 31.50, closed at 31.55. Starbucks, little pullback, can't keep this name down. Looks like it wants to move higher, back above the 10 period EMA and the 20. Looking good on Starbucks. MACD above the zero line, turning back up. That could be good. Keep an eye on the histogram. That should give you a sign whether this is going to continue to move higher. Total System Services, TSS, Financial Administration, I believe they're in the credit card billing area as well. Note the flag, pennant, moving higher off of the 10 period EMA. Bollinger Bands are both turned up, so that just means it should see a continued grind higher. MACD and Slow STO both look bullish. Alta Salon, breakout on Friday, looking really good. Closed at 171.04. Got that previous high at 171.21. Bollinger Bands are really tight. This one could take off in a big way if the indices cooperate. Note MACD turning back up. Nice little cross there. So Alta's looking pretty good. Visa is also looking a little sneaky. Little flag pattern here. Price is back above the 10 and the 20. Nice tight Bollinger Bands. No overhead supply at 52-week highs. Slow STO turning up, MACD turning as well. Watch for MACD to cross and watch these histogram bars. If they get shorter on Monday, Tuesday, that's probably going to be an indication that we're going to pop higher on Visa. Okay, that's going to do it for me, traders. This is Cousin Vinny coming to you from theclosingprint.com. Be sure to check out the Closing Print blog site as well. Here's your address right here. Note this is case sensitive, CV_blog, so capital CV and B. For new traders, I post all of our setups and thoughts for the day typically. I also post on the weekends. You note my tweets are here as well. And you can check back in the library. There's quite a bit here to look at going back several years. In addition, if you're not following me on StockTwits, you can check the site out there, the stream there as well. Okay, take care. I hope this helps, and we'll talk to you on Monday.